Okay, so what we have here is the Digital SAT Exam Module 2. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hide the timer. Remember, I've got it on double time only because I'm explaining things out loud and I'm reading everything out loud for your benefit on the other end of watching this video. I'm also going to make sure that we can cross off answer choices. And then I went down here and starting with question 17. Now, a moment ago, what I did is I looked for the first question right around the middle of the module that had this instruction. Which choice completes the text so it conforms to the conventions of standard English? So basically, this is English grammar. If you start there about in the middle of the module, you start with questions that have the least amount of reading, and so you'll be able to pick up time, more time that you have for the end, which is going to be more reading. All right, let's go ahead and read this question. There are 5 key stages when firing pottery. Blank, and we're either talking about greenware, recently shaped, soft, still malleable, something like that. So we have to figure out the punctuation and the grammar. So there are 5 key stages. And then it says leather hard, which is partially dried, less moisture content. Bone dry. Now notice, I don't necessarily need to keep reading all of these descriptions, right? Each description is a name after a semicolon followed by parentheses. So I need a name after this semicolon and then something in parentheses, and then we need another semicolon which then goes to this leather hard. So which choice would that be? Well, it's looking like choice B because that's the name, greenware, and then that's the description in the parentheses, and then the semicolon. Okay, so I think that's what we need. We'll move on. Question 18, another English grammar question, conventions of standard English. We're either going to say have been, had been, are, or was. The soccer players blank in position, waiting on the field for the referee to review the last play, when one player spotted an airplane flying overhead. Okay, so what were the soccer players doing? The soccer players have been, had been, are, or was. So was is referring to singular, but it says the soccer players, so referring to multiple people. So the soccer players had been in position. So it's had been because it was ongoing in the past. So I think that follows the conventions of standard English. We'll move on. Question 19, another English grammar question. Which choice completes the text so it conforms to the conventions of standard English? We're going to do stars and giving. We're either going to have a comma, semicolon, colon, or no punctuation. The star fruit grows from the Avaroa carmabola tree, which is native to the tropics of Southeast Asia. The fruit has a unique shape, an elongated oval with deep ridges running down its sides. When sliced at its cross-section, the slices of fruit resemble stars, giving the fruit its nickname. So we're going to say the slices of fruit resemble stars, giving the fruit its nickname. Is the slices of fruit resemble stars, need a comma there? That would set it apart. But is giving separate from stars? I don't think so. It's definitely not setting apart a list, so it's not with a colon. And we're not giving the fruit its nickname is not a complete idea. It's not a complete clause, so we don't need a semicolon. So after narrowing it down to 2 choices, initially when I took this exam, I selected the wrong choice. I selected no punctuation. So it turns out that indeed, giving the fruit its nickname describes the fruit. In other words, it's not essential to the sentence. It's not a complete clause or idea, so it must be set apart with a comma. Giving the fruit its nickname. So we need a comma there, and that would be correct, and then we would move on. Again, conventions of standard English, question 20. So we've got something about reasons, and then to give or while giving. Okay. And we'll look at the punctuation. The distinctive caw, caw, caw of the crow is a sound we've come to associate with the turn from summer to fall. But why is the call of the crow so loud? Notice they italicize, so loud is emphasized. Researchers claim that crows make loud vocalizations for 2 main blank. The impression of a much larger group of crows as a means of gathering more crows to roost together. So two main reasons to give the impression of a much larger group of crows. So what would the correct English grammar be? Researchers claim that crows make loud vocalizations for two main reasons. And then we start to explain that. We're going to sort of start a mini list. It's to give the impression of, so I'm thinking a colon, because a colon sets apart the new last part of the sentence as an explanation. It's not just a pause, and it's not while giving. If we didn't pause at all, like to give the impression, that's not following English grammar. So we're going to go with choice B, and then we'll move on. Okay, again, conventions of standard English, question 21. Are, were, is, or was. The Yahi River Bridge, located in Guizhou, China, is an arch bridge with height of 892 feet and a span of 1,430 feet. It blank one of the highest and longest bridges in the world. Are, were, is, or was. Here we use the word is, so that's present tense. We're going to need to use present tense, and it's singular. It's a single bridge. So we're going to use is. Okay, not are, because that'd be plural. Were is past tense. Was past tense. Okay, we'll move on. Conforming to the conventions of standard English, as World War II came to a close, members of the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives program, MFAA, worked to find and return culturally and historically significant items back to their proper owners. Blank of the MFAA are reported to have saved millions of items from ruin. So collectively, members of the MFAA. So what should we be putting there? Well, collectively is a positive sort of beginning the transition. So we need a transition word and then the subject. So collectively, comma, members. All right, we'll move on. Okay, now question 23. Which choice completes the text with the most logical transition? So now we're looking for a transition word to begin our next sentence. The Road to Oz, L. Frank Baum. So he's the one that wrote The Wizard of Oz. But it is now evening, the king reminded them, and you must stay with us until morning anyhow. Blank, I invite you to be my guests at dinner, to avoid the theater afterward, and sit in the royal box. Tomorrow morning, if you really insist upon it, you may resume your journey. Okay, so let's predict what's in the blank here. And you may sit with us until morning, anyhow. Blank, I invite you. So what is he saying? The king is saying, alternatively. So alternatively is a different choice than setting out to go about the journey. So I think A is definitely a possible choice. He says yet. Yet is like but. So that's more of a stronger transition. I don't think so. He says, therefore, I invite you. So maybe, but I think therefore is more so it follows. And then here it says on the contrary. So on the contrary is a contrast. And so after narrowing the choices down, one of the things we realize the king is saying is, but it is now evening, and you must stay with us until morning anyhow. Therefore, I invite you to be my guests at dinner. So in other words, therefore follows from what the king mentioned about how you must stay. In other words, dinner would be the natural next thing to invite his guests to if they're already not going on their journey. So we're not going to say alternatively because we're not changing to a different alternative by going to dinner. It follows from what the king said that you must stay. So it's therefore. So hope that makes sense. We'll move on to the next one. Okay, question 24. Again, most logical transition. It's either despite this, as a result, of course, or for example. Judge Judy, in italics, that's like a proper name, America's favorite arbitration-based courtroom reality show, witnessed real-life small claims trials arbitrated by Judge Judith Scheindlin. The show ran for an impressive 25 seasons, from its debut in 1996 to its completion in 2021. Judge Judy concluded with a total of 6,280 episodes. Blank, in 2008, Judge Judith Sheldon won the Guinness World Records title for having the longest career as a TV judge. Despite this, I don't think so. That's contrasting. As a result, well, that's very, very possible, especially given the number of episodes mentioned. Of course, again, that's more of an opinion, and that's just sort of along the lines, maybe, so we'll see. And then it says, for example. No, it's not for example. We're not citing an example. As a result, she had so many episodes, she wins the Guinness Book of World Records just as a result. So that's a result from the great number of episodes that she recorded. All right, we will move on. Question 25, text most logical transition. Furthermore, in other words, for this reason or in spite of this. One of the most fascinating hibernation habits is that of the Arctic squirrel. Hibernation for these small mammals occurs from August/September to April. During that time, the Arctic squirrel reduces its body temperature from around 99 degrees Fahrenheit to as low as 27 degrees Fahrenheit, below freezing. Blank, the Arctic squirrel's heart rate is able to drop down to as little as 1 beat per minute. So twice we use the exclamation point. So that suggests something incredible or surprising or amazing. We say something surprising and amazing, and then do we say furthermore? So that extends the idea of amazing. So I'm leaning towards furthermore already. Then we say in other words. Now, in other words is not saying the same thing as body temperature, because we then get to the beating of the heart. For this reason, okay, so maybe. So because the temperature is so low, that's definitely very possible that the Arctic squirrel's heart beats so slow. And then D, we say in spite of this, so we can safely eliminate that. So I think we're going to go with furthermore, because furthermore is still describing the fact that we have fascinating hibernation habits, and we have all this surprise, and it turns out the body temperature is not necessarily the same thing as reducing the heart rate. Okay, we will move on. Okay, so now we have something different for question 26, and I also believe question 27. We're going to look at a student's notes, and then we're going to accomplish a goal. So the student wants to illustrate how language endangerment happens. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? Okay, so we're talking about the Yagua language, Peru, all kinds of things here. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, claims that there are 6,000 languages actively spoken on the earth. At least 3,000 of the 6,000 currently spoken languages are considered to be endangered. One of the main causes of language death is attributed to colonizing forces outlawing indigenous culture or otherwise promoting cultural assimilation. In Peru, the native language Yagua is only spoken amongst approximately 4,000 speakers. In Peru, over 18 million people, approximately 80% of the modern Peruvian population, speak Spanish, and Spanish conquistadors invaded and colonized Peru in 1532. We're going to talk about language endangerment and which choice is going to accomplish this goal. Okay, so we could read from top to bottom or bottom to top. I'm going to recommend bottom to top because sometimes in the SAT they hide the correct answer towards the bottom. So let's look at D. The Yagua language is one of Earth's over 3,000 endangered languages. So does that accomplish how language endangerment happens? I don't think so. Of the 6,000 languages spoken on Earth, at least half are considered to be endangered. Okay, so maybe, but we're not necessarily describing how, so I'm likely to eliminate this choice. In Peru, Spanish colonization in the 16th century led to Spanish become the nation's most spoken language. Meanwhile, native languages like Yagua have almost completely fallen out of use. Okay, so that's describing the situation in Peru, and are we describing necessarily language endangerment? I don't know. Let's look at A. The Yagua language is one of the most least spoken in Peru, while Spanish is the clearly most popular. I think choice A we can safely eliminate because that's not talking about how language endangerment happens. So B is going to be the best choice because Spanish colonization led to Spanish being the most spoken language. And then the native languages are basically going away. They're almost completely fallen out of use. So that's actually the process of how language endangerment happens. Okay, so we're going to select B for question 26 and move on. Okay, so now for question 27, the student wants to emphasize how the research study supports a broader claim about physiological development. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? Scientists have studied and found correlations between organisms' endurance and the ratio of their leg lengths to body masses. A study of Australian social huntsman spiders analyzed the physiological differences between males and females as they mature. Male huntsman spiders must travel long distances to find mates. Male huntsman spiders, which are faster than female huntsman spiders, are one of the fastest and highest stamina species of spiders known. When compared to females, male huntsman spiders experience significant leg growth during maturity, but their body size hardly increases. Once fully mature, male huntsman spiders have longer legs and smaller bodies than mature females of the same species. Now, there's a lot mentioned here about male huntsman spiders, which have longer legs, and it turns out that there is a correlation, as mentioned here, between the endurance and the ratio of leg length. Okay? And there are physiological differences between the males and the females. The student wants to emphasize the broader claim about physiological development. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? Let's read from D up to A. D, the differences in speed and endurance between mature male and female huntsman spiders are directly caused by differences in how their respective bodies develop. Are there significant differences in speed and endurance between them? And is it related to how their bodies develop? That definitely seems what the notes to be about. Okay? They don't mention the legs, but certainly how the bodies develop. Let's look at C. The long legs, small bodies, and high stamina of male huntsman spiders align with similar correlations found in other species. So we don't necessarily know that's true in other species, and it is something describing male huntsman spiders. So let's not eliminate choice C yet. Male huntsman spiders are able to achieve higher speeds and cover longer distances than female spiders of the species. That's not talking about physiological development, so we can safely eliminate that. The long legs and small bodies of mature male huntsman spiders are well suited for the challenges associated with finding mates. There's nothing mentioned here about finding mates, so we're going to safely eliminate that choice. So let's go back and understand. We want to emphasize the broader claim about physiological development and how this research study emphasizes that. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? So we narrowed it down to choice C and D. And originally when taking this exam, I chose choice D, but choice D was the incorrect answer. It is going to be choice C, and let's think about why that is. In D, first of all, it's very difficult to argue causality. In other words, the differences in speed and endurance between mature male and female huntsman spiders are directly caused by differences in how their respective bodies develop. We don't know if the development of the bodies actually causes the speed differences. We do know the males have longer legs and they do run faster. But we can say for C is correct. The long legs, small bodies, and high stamina of male huntsman spiders align with similar correlations found in other species. That will emphasize how this research study supports a broader claim. So remember, the student is trying to emphasize that broader claim about physiological development and how it's true across several species. So indeed, C will be the best answer. Hope that makes sense. And now it's time to move on to the beginning of the exam. In other words, question 1. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hey, if you're enjoying this content, please go to highpeakeducation.com. We want to work with you, help you with your education, your knowledge, your studies, move you on to understanding and wisdom, that you can move through the academic and challenge parts of this world that require you to really learn content and technical things, and we're happy to help you do that. We have all kinds of different solutions, programs, ways to help you. We have resources and plenty of people for you to work with that we partner with. So, highpeakeducation.com. Thank you very much for watching this video. Let's get back to it. Okay, so now question 1. Which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase? So again, this is basically English vocabulary, and we should predict what kind of word should go in the blank before we select which of these. So consumed, obeyed, devalued, or comprehended. And the following text is from The Angel of Old by Edgar Allan Poe. I had just blank an unusually hearty dinner, of which the dyspeptic truffle formed not the least important item, and was sitting alone in the dining room with my feet upon the fender, and at my elbow a small table which I had rolled up to the fire, and upon which were some apologies for dessert, and some miscellaneous bottles of wine, spirit, and liqueur. The person had just blank an unusually hearty dinner. Did they obey the dinner? I don't think so. The dinner has no agency. Did they devalue the dinner? So it's hearty, so I don't think they devalued it. I don't think they comprehended the dinner, so they definitely consumed it. So consumed is sort of a synonym here for eat the dinner. Okay, so we'll move on. Which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase? Question 2 is basically English vocabulary. We're going to predict what goes in the blank here. Following text is from The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County by Mark Twain, from the collection of The Best American Humorous Short Stories by Alexander Jessup. I have a lurking suspicion that Leonidas W. Smiley is a myth, and that my friend never knew such a personage, and that he only conjectured that if I asked old Wheeler about him, it would remind him of his infamous Jim Smiley, and he would go to work and bore me to death with some exasperating reminiscence of him, as long as blank as it should be useless to me. It was the design, it succeeded. So the person is suspicious that this other person is a myth. We never knew of this person. We only conjectured that if I asked old Wheeler about him, it would remind me of the infamous Jim Smiley, and he would go to work and bore me to death with some exasperating reminiscence of him, as long as blank as it should be useless to me. So in other words, we expect the person to just drone on and on with all kinds of information. So as long as it, what, should be useful to him? Engaging? So maybe, because the person talking to the other person listening might want to engage. As long as, and as vigorous as it should be useless to me. So some exasperating reminiscence of him. So maybe vigorous, because again, vigorous is like with lots of energy. Reminiscence of him as long as, and as tedious as it should be useless to me. Now, tedious is somewhat related to the word useless, because tedious has to do with it's ongoing, and it's hard to get this other person to stop talking. That's what the tedious here suggests. Let's see. Reminiscent of him as long and as beneficial as it should be useless to me. So beneficial is not related to useless. So I'm going to go with the word tedious. Okay, so I think tedious is telling us about this person who keeps talking to the author who's listening. Okay, so we should move on. Okay, which text has the most logical or precise word or phrase? Recovering from, living through, rising above, or wallowing in. Accepting that for the time being, my situation was inescapable. I resolved to enjoy the good in each day to the fullest. Blank, sorrow would change nothing, but seeking joy in the littlest of things would allow me to experience some small pleasures until I could afford greater indulgences. Situations inescapable, we're accepting that, and we're just going to make the best of the day. What about the sorrow would change nothing? Recovering from the sorrow, living through the sorrow, rising above the sorrow, or wallowing in the sorrow? So I think if we're going to make the best in the day, we should not wallow in the sorrow. Wallow is spending extra time immersing ourselves and rethinking about the sorrow, that's not going to change anything. So if it would change nothing, nothing's going to change. We're going to seek joy in the littlest thing. So fits this blank. So now we have question 3 correct. Let's move on. Once again, question 4, most logical, precise word or phrase. So it's either uninterested, wearied, unrelated, or energized. This is coming from Winning His Game. I don't recognize the author. Jimmy Logan stood his skis in the corner behind the door, tramping heavily to get the clinging snow from his shoes, climbed the first flight in Trow Hall slowly, and then dragged blank feet down the corridor to number 19. Once inside his room, he said hello, shed his cap onto his bed, sank exhaustedly in the nearest chair, and so on. Okay, so we probably don't necessarily need to read the rest of the passage. This person comes in after likely skiing, snow cling to his shoes, Trow Hall, we don't know, but it could be a dormitory, it could be like a college residence, I don't know. And then he dragged blank feet, so down to number 19. He also sinks exhaustedly into the nearest chair. So what kind of feet did he drag down the hall? Uninterested? I don't think so. He's interested in going to his destination. Wearied? That's likely because, again, he was exhausted. Unrelated? That doesn't even fit. Energized? I don't think so. That's the opposite of what we're looking for, wearied. Okay, so be wearied for question number 4. We will move on. Okay, most logical and precise word or phrase. So putrefaction, merging, mending, or disillusion. New media art, the blank of visual and digital media, is hardly a new concept. Dating back to the 19th century with early animation devices such as the phenakitoscope and the parixoscope, artists have been combining classical visual art and technology for centuries. Today's technology has brought new media art a long way from the spinning pictures to 3D printers, which allow artists to combine traditional and computational art forms. Okay, so we're saying that new media art, which is the blank of visual and digital media. Now, the idea is that there's lots of talking about combining things. So when we combine things, the idea is that we are looking at these devices which combine classical visual art and technology. So we're going to assume visual and digital media is just the combining. So we're looking for like the word combining here, okay? So that seems most like merging, okay? Not mending. Mending would be like making it better or, making it right. Dissolution, not breaking things apart. And putrefaction has nothing to do with it either. So we're going to go with merging, and we'll move on. Question 6, most logical or precise word or phrase. Ancillary, feeble, impactful, or veiled. To Kill a Mockingbird, that's in italics, that's the name of a novel, is in essence a collection of observations made by American author Harper Lee as a 10-year-old growing up in Alabama in 1936. Lee's novel weaves difficult social and moral issues with empathy and witticisms, making it an important and blank story that has pulled at readers' heartstrings since its publication in 1960. So making it important, what kind of story? It's talking about historical significance of 1936 Alabama, and we're basically weaving a bunch of things together that are social and moral issues that people should care about, and it tugs on people's heartstrings to understand how life works, morality. So what kind of story is it? Is it ancillary? Well, that's kind of like off to the side. Feeble? I don't think so. That's kind of like weak. Impactful? That sounds good to me. Veiled? Veiled would be like concealed. So I'm going to go with impactful. C for the answer, and we'll move on. Question 7. Complete the text with the most logical or precise word or phrase. Occupied, accessible, forsaken, or attainable. It's great to be alive in Colma is a tongue-in-cheek saying that refers back to Colma, California's gold rush era, when a wave of gold-seeking families migrated there to quite literally strike gold or die trying. Commonly referred to as the City of Souls, or the city of the silent, a major part of Coloma's land is blank by cemeteries, 17 to be exact, and approximately 1.5 million deceased residents, outnumbering the living population by almost 1,000 to 1. So the author goes to great detail in using an en dash to tell us it's not just that there's cemeteries, there's not just a lot of dead people that are there who looked for gold, but there's 17 cemeteries, and then the number of people in the cemeteries outnumbers the number of people that live there 1,000 to 1. That's really significant. So we say a major part of Colma's land is blank by cemeteries. So it should be overwhelmed, or we should maybe say dominated, or something like that. So occupied by cemeteries, yeah, that's possible, at least in terms of the mind, maybe in terms of land. Accessible by cemeteries, not necessarily. So accessible has to do with you can easily drive to them. You might not be able to drive to them. They might be on hillsides. We don't know. Forsaken by cemeteries, I don't think so. The cemeteries are there to stay. Major part of Colma's land is attainable by cemeteries. I don't think attainable has anything to do with it. So I'm going to go with occupied by cemeteries. You'd expect, if there's this many cemeteries, that most of the land there is cemeteries. So I've never been to such place in California. I'm not sure if any of you have, but we're going to move on. Okay, most logical and precise word or phrase. Question 8, patrimony, deficiency, profit, or legacy. American author Eric Carles, or it's Carlisle, I'm not sure, blank in children's literature goes beyond the pages of The Very Hungry Caterpillar. The Very Hungry Caterpillar must be a book because it's in italics. Since his start in 1969, Carlisle has written and illustrated over 70 children's books, many of which have been translated and sold worldwide. Children around the world continue to be enchanted by Carlisle's stories and illustrations featuring animals, insects, and nature, making them some of the best-selling works in children's literature to this day. Okay, so clearly this author has had a huge impact, and it goes beyond just probably his most famous work. Let's speculate that's what this is. He's illustrated a lot of things. There's lots of things about insects, animals, nature. It still is prevalent today, whenever today it's being read. Eric Carlisle's blank in children's literature. So it's something like contribution, or his impact, or his works that place his mark on, something like that. So patrimony, I don't think he's it's patrimony. His deficiency, it's definitely not deficiency, no way. His profit in children's literature, maybe, but I think legacy is right on, because legacy says it goes way beyond probably his most famous work. In other words, he's prolific and we can still get his books to today. Okay, so we'll move on. Okay, so now with question 9, we now move on to a more reading passage. And we're going to read this passage, and then based on the text, we're going to answer a comprehension question. What compels Mr. Emerson to discourage Lucy from marrying Cecil? Okay, what compels Mr. Emerson to discourage Lucy from marrying Cecil? He's going to either argue, accredit, believe, or contend something. So E.M. Forster's novel A Room with a View, Lucy Honeychurch is seated in the study, waiting to wed Cecil Vyse, a man whom she does not truly love. She is met by old Mr. Emerson, the father of her true love, George Emerson, whose intent is to dissuade Lucy from wrongfully marrying Cecil. So, what compels him to do this? Let's read. She turned to Mr. Emerson in despair, but his face revived her. It was the face of a saint who understood. Quote, now it is all dark. Now beauty and passion never seem to have existed. I know, but remember the mountains over Florence and the view. Ah, dear, if I were George and gave you one kiss, it would make you brave. You have to go cold into battle that needs warmth. out into the muddle that you have made yourself, and your mother and all your friends will despise you. Oh, my darling, and rightly, if it is ever right to despise. George still dark, all the tussle and the misery without a word from him. Am I justified? Into his own eyes tears came. Yes, we fight for more than love and pleasure. There is truth. Truth counts. Truth does count. Okay, so Mr. Emerson is trying to discourage Lucy from not marrying Cecil. And he's talking about George, which is his son. Let's read kind of that first part of his quote to how he tries to dissuade her. Because we know he's a saint, and we know that he is tilted in his perspective towards the truth. Now it is all dark. Now beauty and passion never seem to have existed. I know. But remember the mountains over Florence and the view. Ah, dear, if I were George and gave you one kiss, it would make you brave. You have to go cold into battle that needs warmth, out into the muddle that you have made for yourself, and your mother and all your friends will despise you, if somebody could be despised. What is he doing? Does he argue that love is one of the only reasons one should marry? Maybe. Does he accredit pleasure as the most important source of marital happiness? I don't necessarily think so. Does he believe she should fight for truth? That's in alignment with what he is saying, especially in his conclusion. Or does he contend that mutual faith in God and a man are at the heart of a strong marriage? Okay, so it's definitely not the last choice. He's not arguing about faith at all. I don't think he argues that love is only one of the reasons one should marry. I think he's arguing for truth. So, I mean, C, there's a lot to read, but I think that C is our most righteous choice for what he does to discourage Lucy from marrying Cecil. What is true is more important than maybe what she feels or the love only. Okay, so if that makes sense, we'll move on. Okay, so now question 10, we do have to read another passage. This one's a little shorter than question 9. And then which finding, if true, would most directly support the student's claim? Born in Chansey, Peru, Mariano Morikawa is an esteemed Peruvian-Japanese environmental scientist. Morikawa has been lauded for his environmental work, specifically his commitment to the decontamination of bodies of water in Peru through his own company, Nano Plus 7. In a paper for an environmental science class, a student claims that Morikawa has made a significant and efficient impact on Peruvian ecosystem through pollution control and mitigation through using nanotechnology. This person, Mariano, is Peruvian Japanese. He's an environmental scientist, and he's controlled pollution and mitigation through, and he's using nanotechnology. He's got a lot of environmental work, decontamination of bodies in the water through his company. Which of the true, if these were true, would support the student's claim that he's really important and prolific and helpful and so on to the country and so on? Does Morikawa has turned his attention to the decontamination of a certain river and the bodies of water throughout the Ecuadorian Andes Mountains? Maybe, because he's decontaminating the bodies of water that would support the student's claim, so we're on the right track. B, unassisted in just 14 days, Morikawa used nanotechnology to decontaminate and revive an entire lake located in this location. Saying just 15 days, so that's like using the nanotechnology and doing it quickly, so that supports the student's claim. Morikawa's mission is to clean contaminated bodies of water around Peru using organic and environmentally friendly methods in order to allow natural ecosystems to begin again. So we don't necessarily know if the natural ecosystems is like the final goal. So I think that we can safely eliminate that from the choices. And then D, after finding success in cleaning the lake at this place, Morikawa turned his efforts towards Lake Titicaca and the Huacasina Lagoon. He turned towards other things, but that's less supportive of the student's claim. Now, let's see if we can identify what the student's claim is. The student claims that he's made a significant and efficient impact on the ecosystem. So this doesn't get into the ecosystem part, choice D. So is he making a huge effect on the ecosystem? Well, we have to talk about decontamination, but he's making a significant impact. Okay, so a significant impact would be choice B, because he didn't just turn his attention to the river and the bodies of water. He's doing it quickly with the technology that is the nanotechnology. So I think B is going to be our best choice. Okay, so we'll move on. Okay, question 11. Which finding from the second study, if true, would best support the claim of the nightmare disorder patients? So we need to read this passage and figure out which of these is most appropriate. A study has shown that a single sound made during REM sleep cycle can effectually decrease nightmares and increase emotionally positive dreams. However, nightmare disorder patients claim that the execution of this type of therapy treatment would be too difficult to incorporate into their daily sleep cycle, as the single sound must be started at exactly the right moments during the REM cycle for it to be effective. Let's see, a second study was conducted to investigate this claim. Okay, so in the first study, we're saying that a single cycle can help us have emotionally positive dreams, but people that have nightmares say it's kind of difficult to incorporate because you have to start it at just the right time while you're sleeping. What about the second study? If it's true, which would best support the claim of the nightmare disorder patients? Okay, is it 9 out of 10 subjects found the sound used to interrupt REM cycles to elicit feelings of calm and tranquility? That would not so much support what they're claiming, because this means it's pretty effectual, and 9 in 10 are saying yes. 7 in 10 were unable to conduct the sound therapy treatment successfully due to their inability to effectively time the sound. Yeah, that's definitely in accordance with what's going on in study 1. In other words, when the person's falling asleep, they can't necessarily push the button to get the sound to go. So that B is probably our best choice. 3 in 10 subjects were not able to have their REM sleep cycles interrupted by the sound due to their own snoring. There's no mention of snoring, so we can safely eliminate that. 1 in 10 test subjects found that the sound made during their REM sleep cycle effectively interrupted their nightmare disorder, allowing them a good night's sleep. Okay, so only 1 in 10. That's a statistical point, but I think B is having to do with the timing. So again, B is definitely the best choice, because if it were true, it would support the claim of the nightmare disorder patients. Okay, so we'll move on. Okay, we're going to read this passage. Which finding, if true, would most directly support the researchers' hypothesis? The Japanese concept of ikaigi refers to a person's greater motivation or purpose in life. It specifically deals with the perceived feelings of fulfillment and accomplishment that come when one dedicates focus and energy to their personal values and passions. Researchers have hypothesized that people who feel ikaigi strongly tend to live longer and have fewer cardiovascular issues than those who do not. So which finding, if true, would most directly support the hypothesis? So the people of Okinawa, Japan tend to report greater fulfillment and satisfaction in their jobs. As a result, enjoy greater longevity than other Japanese populations. Businessmen in Tokyo, Japan are more likely to retire at younger ages than traditional craftsmen. Again, I don't think that we're talking about fulfillment, so we can eliminate that. People who report a stronger sense of ikaigi show no greater or lesser likelihood in developing tumors which support suffering from cardiovascular issues. Again, that doesn't seem right, so I'm hoping this is correct. The concept of ikigai is thought to be innate. It cannot be taught. So if it can't be taught, it's not as useful. So we've got to figure out which of these is correct. Now, let's look at A. Yes, we're not talking about Okinawa here, but look at A. They tend to report greater fulfillment and satisfaction in their jobs. And as a result, they enjoy greater longevity. So they have that satisfaction, fulfillment, and then their greater longevity. So that's definitely in accordance with ikaigi. We were able to eliminate B and C, but it's not innate. It has to be either taught or it's part of like the culture. So that's part A. So I think we've got the correct answer. We can move on. Number 13, which finding, if true, would most directly support Greg's argument? Cryptography experts are in an ongoing battle against hardware innovation. The faster computer processors become, the easier it becomes to brute force passwords. In other words, the process of rapidly inputting and testing passwords until revealing the correct combination of characters. To counteract this threat, modern programmers like Jackson Gregg are advocating for the universal adoption of hash functions to help encrypt passwords and keep data safe. Hash functions require computers to perform extra computational work to validate a password. The amount of extra work required can be increased to keep pace with technological advancements. Gregg argues the hash functions are an effective, future-proof tool for thwarting bad actors looking to brute force logins. So which finding, if true, would directly support Jackson Gregg's argument? There's software now that can input lots of passwords very quickly and then just hack into someone's system in a nefarious way, and we are arguing that we've got to use this hash function, which will keep things more secure. So let's look for that. Hash functions are one of the best lines of defense against brute force attacks, yet they are unlikely to be useful in perpetuity. Unlikely to be useful in perpetuity, that does not go along with future-proof tool. So I think we can probably eliminate this one. Some hash functions are less powerful than others, resulting in a minimal defensive value against brute force attacks. So I don't think that strengthens the argument, so we're going to eliminate that. There are a number of different hash function protocols programmers can choose from, each with their own complexity and degree of usefulness. So it's nice that we have the choices, but we want them all to be useful. How about D? Hash functions should be able to perpetually reduce the number of password guesses that can be brute force per second from billions to 10 or less. So we're going to reduce the number of password guesses that can be brute forced. What that means is that's going to prevent the hackers from doing their thing. In other words, people can't guess passwords just as quickly as possible. In fact, on my wife's iPhone recently, I tried a couple passcodes, then it locked me out for a few minutes. So to some extent, that's related to hash functions. So that's actually something that seems reasonable in terms of this passage. Okay, so I think we can move on. Okay, question 14. Which choice most logically completes the text? Auroras, commonly referred to as the northern or southern lights, can often be viewed by the naked eye in locations closest to the Earth's magnetic poles. Auroras occur in Earth's magnetosphere, the zone located in the upper atmosphere that's controlled by Earth's magnetic field. Auroras occur when a current of charged particles, electrons and protons, often referred to as the solar wind, crashes into gases located in the magnetosphere. As a result, okay, so which just next logically comes? Do natural satellites and comets often create auroras? I don't think so. Flashes of colorful lights can be seen in the night sky. Okay, so that seems to go along with auroras because that's exactly what an aurora is. Other planets in the solar system have magnetospheres. We're not talking about other planets at all here. And then D, the magnetosphere protects our planet from the solar wind. That's not what actually the previous sentence was about. The previous sentence says when the electrons and protons crash into the magnetosphere, we get flashes of colorful lights that can be seen in the night sky, which is the definition of the aurora. Again, the aurora borealis, it's a beautiful thing, northern hemisphere, aurora australis in the southern hemisphere. Okay, so I'll move on. Which choice most logically completes the text? Researchers at Ben Gurion University created a study to determine whether fish and humans perceive visual stimuli similarly. For their study, researchers use archerfish. In their natural habitat, these fish hunt their prey by spitting a rapid stream of water at leaves overhead, forcing insects to fall from the leaves in order to eat them. Keeping this natural behavior in mind, researchers created a controlled experiment in which archerfish were trained to perform a series of visual search tasks using targets that varied by color, size, orientation, and motion. What they found is that archerfish are fully capable of processing varied visual stimuli, suggesting that Okay, before we go on, hopefully you notice the timer is now visible. That's because at 5 minutes, the timer, no matter even if you hide it, will become visible. So we got to finish up the last two questions, question 15 and 16. What they found is that archerfish are fully capable of processing varied visual stimuli, suggesting that. So the idea is that the archerfish can look at different things and then hit their target. So what would most logically complete the text? Is it the archerfish's perception of visual stimuli is comparable to that of humans? We can't necessarily be sure. There are some similarities, but we can't necessarily be sure. Archerfish identify visual stimuli as it pertains to survival only. Again, we can't necessarily be sure. Humans and fish both perceive visual stimuli similarly in regards to reproduction. There's no mention of reproduction, so we can safely eliminate C. Fish and humans, as well as other vertebrates, amphibians, and birds, are able to distinguish between objects no matter size, color, positioning, or movement. We're bringing in all this other information, no matter size, color, orientation, movement. We can't necessarily be sure. So which most logically completes the text? Is it the archerfish's perception of visual stimuli is comparable to that of humans, or they identify stimuli pertaining to survival only? I'm going to say it's comparable to that of humans, because that was introduced in the first sentence. In other words, when we say similarly. Okay? So we're going to move on to the last question, question 16. And then, which choice most logically completes the text? So it's something having to do with music. Music downloads have forever changed how music is bought and sold. It is a rarity these days to walk into a brick and mortar store to purchase physical copies of albums. However, with the ease in which consumers can buy music downloads from online music stores comes the necessity for paid downloads to be encoded with digital rights management, DRM, protection. DRMs are used as a safeguard to protect artists and record labels from consumers illegally copying and distributing music. Even so, the massive increase in music sales since the launch of music downloads suggests that, okay, so let's think about this. We need to securely protect digital music downloads. I don't know if many of you remember, there were the old days of like Napster and LimeWire, where it was kind of the Wild West. You could download all this music and then, burn some CDs and things like that. So it was a crazy world. So now, what do we suggest? We don't want people illegally copying and distributing music. So even so, it's contrasting. The massive increase in sales suggests that what? True music lovers will continue to patronize brick and mortar shops to purchase physical copies of music? I don't necessarily think so. In fact, that's pretty unlikely. DRMs, that's digital rights managements, have not made music downloads less convenient for the most people, have not made less convenient. So have they made things more convenient? Okay, so first of all, it's awkward, but secondly, I'm not necessarily sure. C, the music industry is becoming more interested in making money than making music more accessible to the masses. Okay, so we're not necessarily talking about making more money, so I think we can eliminate. Does it suggest that artists lose money with every purchase of a music download? Not necessarily. So let's read B carefully. Have DRMs, let's see, because there's been a massive increase in music sales since the launch of music downloads, does it suggest that DRMs have not made music downloads less convenient for most people? So I think that that is true, because most people can still buy their music online. Okay, I'm going to go to the next question to make sure that they're all in here. Okay, so they are all in here. Then I'm going to go to question 27 and then click end. Okay, so I'm going to end the module. And what we now have is the break. So if you're on the SAT exam, the first two modules are reading, writing. Then you get a 10-minute break. And then after the 10-minute break, you can go into the next two modules, which are the math modules. So I'm looking forward to those math modules. Thank you for those of you who have watched this all the way to the end. I hope this is super helpful for your digital SAT preparation. And thank you for watching High Peak Education. Please smash that like button if you enjoy this content. Please share this amongst your social networks. We've got links to social media down in the description of the video. Please support us. We thank you very much for your time and attention. You can reach out to High Peak Education. We are happy to work with you on your studies and your learning. So I will look forward to seeing you in the next module.